Well, as you know, since the 25th and 27th of July of 2007, I had warned that we are headed into a general breakdown crisis of the world financial monetary system and the economic system. 3 days later, after that announcement, the beginning of the breakup of the world monetary financial system occurred. It occurred in the form of the dropping out of the mortgage market in the United States. That's the home market. And this spread quickly internationally. Now, another thing happened at the same time. There was a fundamental shift in the world economy because, as you know by now, having seen the triple curve, you know that the world economy is governed presently by a global triple curve function. Forget all the forecasts by the Wall Street crowd, the statisticians. They're all incompetent, and they're always wrong. They have always been wrong and will be wrong because they use a wrong method. They use statistical forecasting based on accounting characteristics, and that does not determine the way economies function. Economies are based on three today, and in European civilization, off and on, largely for several thousand years, have been determined by a threefold principle of economy. On the top, you have international monetary systems. Even before the fall of the Persian Empire, you had monetary systems controlled Asia, especially East Asia and South Asia. And the fall of monetary systems was usually the trick which tipped off the collapse of economies in those regions. Physical collapses of those economies as a result of the monetary processes and the effects of monetary processes. With the collapse of the Persian Empire and the Peloponnesian War, there was a change. And that change, which occurred with the Peloponnesian War or its aftermath, has determined the history of economy in European and broader civilization ever since that time. The three characteristics are, number one, the monetary system. A monetary system, by that I mean a money system, which is privately controlled or imperially controlled over the price of money. Monetary systems. These are used to control trade and other things. All empires, all European empires, including the British Empire today, are not controlled by nation-state power, they are controlled by imperial monetary power. And nation-states as such, which play an imperial role, are simply victims of monetary systems. That's number one. Number two, you have, within nations, you have financial systems, and in trade among nations, you have financial systems. These are systems in which money is used to buy and sell goods. This is a financial system, but it involves at some points the sale of services and or goods. Thirdly, you have a physical economy. The physical economy measures both the extent and the rate of growth or decline of physical consumption, produced physical consumption, which includes the role of services in those functions. So you have three curves that in the past history, for more than 3,000 years to date, from Europe and beyond, have controlled world economy. Monetary systems at the top, and they are always imperialist. Secondly, financial systems of nations and in trade between nations. This is the use of money for the purchase and sale of goods, where monetary systems are the sale of money for money and by money. Thirdly, physical production and productivity per capita and per square kilometer of territory. These are the three factors of economy and have been the three determining factors of economy for over 3,000 years of European and extended European history. No change today. In November of 1923, the German economy disintegrated. what we are experiencing now in the world, especially in Western and Central Europe and in North America, what we are experiencing is a general breakdown crisis on a global scale, which is a virtual copy, but on a global scale, of which occurred on a national scale in 1923 Germany. Now that means there never was and there never will be an economic recovery of the United States under the Obama administration. The Obama administration is doomed to an early general breakdown crisis of the U.S. economy. And a similar condition exists in Western and Central Europe. And the situation in Western and Central Europe for the moment is hopeless because it's under a dictatorship. It's under a British dictatorship. And they have so far submitted to that British dictatorship. When we're talking about something already in motion, not something that might happen, it's something which is already happening. And it's increasing day by day. Under Obama and his present policy, there will never be a recovery or even a survival of the United States. That's a fact. That's not a guess. That's not a crystal ball picture. That's not a statistical forecast. That is already a fact. You have a zooming rate of bailout money. Bailout money is entirely monetary aggregate. Hyperinflationary bailout. You have, since the summer of 2007, you have an escalating rate of collapse of the real economy in the United States. The things which, goods which, and services for which things are bought and sold. And the ratio, all our basic industry has been wiped out. The auto industry, all the kinds of industries related to that are being wiped out. Food supply is being wiped out by international food systems, food control systems, cartels. The United States has been in a process of disintegration. What I've been involved in recently has been the development of a solution. The solution, and it's the only shot you've got, is a four-power agreement, prospectively, among the United States, with a change in the current administration's policy, Russia, China, India, and some smaller countries which would be willing to participate in this. This would represent a governments of the world which account for about half or more of the population of the world. So that if an initiative is made, this includes the United States, Russia, China, India, and other countries. If an alliance of these four and other countries occurs, that is sufficient power to bring down the present world system and at the same time institute a new one. The first step in that direction was implemented recently in negotiations between Russia and China. They agreed that China, using its credits, which is largely the debt of the United States to China, to use that as a resource of credit, its capital, for cooperation with Russia in developing the essential systems centered on transportation systems and power systems in that part of the world, that part of Asia. There are now negotiations going on, supplementing what has already been agreed to by Russia and China, with India. There is a potentiality of the United States, because if the United States, which is in a disastrous condition, which has a vast debt to China and other countries because of the mismanagement of this place, if we cooperate with Russia, China, and India, which is a great part of the population of this planet, and include other nations of Asia, such as Korea, China, Mongolia, and others, which are eager to cooperate in such a venture. And if you take into account a Pakistan, which is totally unstable, and rendered unstable by what's going on in Afghanistan and other parts of that region, and the fact that India is aware that the very existence of India depends upon the security of Pakistan in dealing with this problem which the British are trying to build up in Afghanistan and elsewhere. You find that nations, out of desperation and awareness of their threats and awareness of their interests, are beginning to move in a direction toward collaboration in changing this system. If the United States comes to its senses, and it's up to Americans here to a large degree. Americans have got to stand up on their hind legs. But we're not waiting for a trigger event which says we either have a depression or we don't have a depression. We already have a depression. And whatever happens on whatever date, this system is doomed under its present policies. There's nothing that can save the United States under its present policies now. That is foregone. There's nothing waiting the American people out there except doom right now. We could reverse that. And how will we do that? Simple. Use our Constitution. What do? We go back to Glass-Steagall. We just say that all commercial banks, which are commercial banks, or which used to be commercial banks, will now be put through bankruptcy reorganization of the type that Franklin Roosevelt specified back in 1933. That would mean that we would look at all the accounts in these banks, and those that conform to a Glass-Steagall standard will be protected under bankruptcy protection by the U.S. government. Those parts which do not conform to a Glass-Steagall standard are gone. Look, no more money. It's gone. These banks are gone. This system is gone. We now have a shrunken financial system. Many billions, even trillions of dollars have been wiped off the books in a great bankruptcy reorganization, which does have certain similarities to what happened in Weimar Germany in November, December of 1923. Suddenly, all the worthless paper was gone, except they didn't have a good system to handle it. We do. Our system. Under those conditions, we can then use our federal system to create new credit to rebuild an economy. But it means wiping out most of the loose money people who have control of our financial system today. We're talking about tens of trillions of dollars being wiped off the books. That's the price that has to be paid if we're going to get an economy that can survive. That's where we stand. That's what has to happen. If we have the guts to put the system to a bankruptcy reorganization, this nation can survive. It will survive on the condition that we make an alliance to break the power of the British Empire and the British interests internationally. That means making a partnership with Russia, China, India, and other countries to eliminate the present world monetary system. Eliminate the present monetary system and go to a credit system, which is the system adopted by the United States before our Constitution was actually formed, under Alexander Hamilton, in dealing with the war debt of the United States in the early 1780s, and then became an integral part in the foundation of our federal Constitution at a later point. So if we go back to our constitutional standard of a credit system and join with Russia, China, India, and other countries in also getting a block of a credit system, we have the power then, with the support of other nations who are looking for a solution, to eliminate the imperial system, which runs the monetary system, which runs the planet today. That's our only chance. So what I did recently in this connection, we have some gentlemen who are Russians who are known to me, scientists. They're in their 70s and 80s, which is, for me, it's good. 70s and 80s are good. My best memories come from the 70s and 80s. I took steps to try to solve this threat to our existence. And I have dealt for some time with efforts to get Russia, particularly China, but Russia in particular, and India, and I've been doing that over some decades, to enter into forms of cooperation with the United States, where I knew that our people in the United States, when rightly advised, would want this kind of cooperation. And this becomes particularly important now because countries which are technically should be viable partners of the United States, such as Germany and France, are presently not really at this time. They used to be more so, they're less so now. And unfortunately, they are presently under the control of the British, which means that they don't have real freedom. They're not independent powers anymore. They would like to be powers again and can become powers again. But the trick is, first of all, we've got to break the system. And my concentration is, okay, the United States, Russia, China, India, and other relevant countries, if they band together, can change this system. And I've been working at that for a long time. And I've gotten into troubles with various people because I did it. But I knew I was right. So this issue of the United States, Russia, China, India, and some other countries as a cooperating bloc to destroy once and for all the British Empire and what it represents is the only chance for humanity now. Otherwise, you are headed inevitably now for a permanent dark age for a long period of time, maybe 2 or 3 generations. We now have 6.7 billion people estimated. We will go down to 2 or less in a fairly short, rapid, unless we do this. So there's a very strong incentive, and some countries have realized that they're in danger. For example, I mentioned before, you have the case of India. India has had a long, well-orchestrated conflict with Pakistan, which was organized by the British Empire, by the British monarchy itself. But now India now recognizes that Pakistan is not its great enemy. That the breakup of Pakistan would mean that the entire region, the so-called Islamic region, would be destroyed. And if that were destroyed, then India would be destroyed. India is now smart enough to recognize that it needs to have a cooperative relationship with Pakistan and some other countries and influences in that region to defend itself. And therefore, to do that, it must have cooperation with Russia, China, Mongolia, and so forth. And therefore, there is, in that part of the world, a very strong tendency for recognizing these problems and these possible solutions. It is also recognized that this type of solution is not possible without the participation of the United States. And that's what I'm up to. And I've been dealing with Russian circles and talking with Chinese circles and so forth, and Indian circles for some time, off and on, and recently more seriously. And we're now at that point. We have now, were I president, there would be no problem with this problem. The United States, Russia, China, and India, and other countries in the region will and can cooperate if allowed to do so. It's in their interest to do so. All we have to do is have the right influence in the United States, and we can pull it off. We can save ourselves in this mess. And we have to save this economy. We have to put this entire economy through a Glass-Steagall type of reform immediately. We must take all banks which have any characteristic of commercial banks in them, put all these banks under government receivership in bankruptcy, put them into bankruptcy reorganization by a Glass-Steagall standard, the one that used to be on the books that we know we have to return to. Keep the commercial banks functional. Those which are in bankruptcy presently, put them back into operation because people had their savings there, and we have to defend that. Then by canceling all this worthless paper, maybe $20 trillion worth of worthless paper, cancel it. It's fake money. It's not honest money by Glass-Steagall standards. Then create, by a federal act, create something which Roosevelt would have done. Create a reorganization of the U.S. economy. Now, we've destroyed most of our industries. We have almost lost the skills that were concentrated in the auto industry for machine tool design and similar kinds of skills. We've lost the ability for major infrastructure. We're about to lose the last remnant of the aircraft industry. We're losing our machine tool capability. We do not have functioning industries of the type we used to have 10 years ago. We've lost it. We have communities that are disintegrating. What we're going to have to do is have a mass program of basic economic infrastructure of the type that requires a maximum emphasis on agriculture and machine tool design in order to make sure to get the highest levels of technology functioning again immediately in this country. We've got to get to a full employment program, which is not a make-work employment program, but a one of infrastructure which is actually building the skills and productive powers of the nation. We're going to have to cooperate among nations to enhance this capability. We're going to have a 1.5% to 2% basic interest rate for these kinds of projects, which will be authorized by the federal government. We're going to talk in terms of 50-year and less shorter types of investments by the federal government. We're going to build a mass transit system. We're going to build a nuclear power system beyond anybody's imagination today. We can do it. All you have to do is start doing it, and you can replicate the project and train more people in it. And that way we're going to save the nation. We're going to save the planet. We will find that Europe, probably beginning in Europe, in Germany and France, which are nations which have the greatest relative potential for getting back into business, except for the greedies in Germany. We're going to have to start to do that. We're going to have to continue and expand the general problem for Africa, the general program of development for Africa. We're going to have to look at the countries of South America from the same standpoint. And within 10 years or less, we will have rebuilt for the United States a semblance of what we once thought we had in modern terms. That's what we must do. And you in the United States must do it. You must organize those in the United States to do exactly this. Because I can tell you that Russia is prepared to do this. China is prepared to do this. There are 1.4 billion Chinese. That's important. There are over 1 billion Indians. They're important. Russia commands one of the greatest raw materials potentials of the planet in the Arctic region. We have in North America, we have in Canada, in Alaska, we have a similar potential for development in the Arctic regions and subarctic regions. We can make a revolution on this planet rapidly, within 10 years, easily. We can change things to get us moving in a completely different direction. But the problem lies not with who we criticize outside in other nations, though criticism must be made. We have to look at ourselves. We are the supposedly great power. We are the nation which inspired modern society. We have to kick our people in the butt and get them to organize themselves for no less a purpose than their own survival. So this stuff we've been doing and putting up with, this debating, this question of popular opinion, this question, well, I don't think, well, I'm not sure, but somebody tells me, but somebody says differently than you're saying, idiocy, cowardice, corruption. When people don't think things through in a time of crisis because they want to doubt or they want to protest or they want to raise some projection of that type, You kind of people who are condemn themselves to hell. And if they're looking for it, they probably will find it. So the point is, it lies with us. The crisis is now. The time is short. The weeks ahead cannot be wasted. I will be working during these coming months, several months, to try to put into place some of the agreements which are needed to get this world out of this mess. But I need some more showing from the American people of all particular degrees. Let's get up off the ground. Let's mobilize, and let's take charge. The mass strike movement, which we saw in August, is good, but it was not good enough. Because then the people who were enraged were saying justly, you, to their members of Congress. You shut up, listen to us. Huh? They didn't say, we're taking charge. And that's the difference. Thank you.
The first question that I want to ask you comes from someone in Russia who you have been engaged in an ongoing dialogue with on these very questions. I will put my question to you in slightly different form. Do you agree that Russia and China are able to perform this project even if the dollar collapses?
On the latter question, no. Without the United States, Russia and China's cooperation would not be successful. The other question to consider here, the deeper one is, there is no such thing as an autonomous economy on this planet today. There is no self-sufficiency. Nor is there any pairwise self-sufficiency. If two nations decide to try to cooperate and tell the rest go to hell, they'll go to hell first. They'll be delivered the next day, in fact, to that destiny. Now, you don't have a rule system. You don't have national economic systems anymore. You don't understand globalization. The problem in Russia today is largely a result of the failure to recognize the menace of globalization. Because that was what was done to Russia, was globalization. Russia's potential does not lie very much in its own existing industries. That is, on the scale of those industries. And trade in that country or trade with other countries and a few countries is not going to solve anything. You've got to increase the productive powers of labor of each country and all countries, and that you can only do with cooperation because of globalization. There is no such thing. For example, take the case of grain. Helga went through this in her presentation just a few weeks ago on this question. There is no such thing as any independent nation on this planet. If you're not prepared to destroy Cargill, you don't have independence. If you don't look at the firms that control your food supplies on this planet and go in there, with, if necessary, with troops and straighten them out, you're not going to have a food supply. You need an authoritative international force composed of sovereign nation states, but an effective force which is powerful enough to go in and shut down Cargill. Otherwise, you don't have a chance. You're in a globalized system. What's a globalized system? It's an empire. You tolerated Cargill. You tolerated similar kinds of firms. You tolerated globalization, and you thought you were smart. You had legislators who did that in country after country. You talked about globalization. The Tower of Babel, back again, with similar results promised. for now. That's the issue. We have to take a bunch of nations which do have enough power to represent sovereignty, which is largely the United States, Russia, China, and India, and a few neighboring countries which will share their emotions in this matter. And that will constitute a representative body of the human race. And that representative body of the human race is going to go out and crush the imperialists. I am declaring war. As Franklin Roosevelt said, I hate war, but that's why I got to declare it. Now that's the solution here. We have to create an economy. No economy presently exists. No sovereign national economy presently exists anywhere on this planet. You want to talk about trade within and among nations? You don't have sovereign nations anymore. There's no nation on this planet that's sovereign. It's all under globalization. It's under the empire. What's the empire? The empire is the British Empire. The enemy is the British Empire. And the British Empire does include Buckingham Palace, or there's another name for the place, but I won't use it here. And there is Threadneedle Street. That exists. But the empire is international. It's an international monetary system. The system which is typified by the globalizers, the ones that control the food supply of the world, that control the mineral supply of the world, that control the industries of the world. These bastards have to be shut down in order to get our national sovereignties back. And what we have is a nasty pact of nations who say we're going to take our national sovereignty back. We're going to eliminate globalization. We're going to have equitable treaty agreements among cooperating nations. We're going to think in terms of 50-year projects, in some cases 100-year projects. The development of northern Siberia is a 100-year project, which is extended across through the Bering Straits, through a tunnel through the Bering Straits, into Alaska, into Canada, and down into the United States. We're going to take the Arctic region of the continents, and we're going to start to develop them because they contain essential resources, and we do know how to deal with them. At least some of us do. We're going to deal with Africa. We're going to build a modern type of railway system which unites the world. We can divide, as we've done this, and reported on this repeatedly. We can today create the equivalent of a high-speed rail system, including a magnetic levitation system, with a high degree of automation in it. We can create an entirely new transportation system for the entire planet. We can connect all of Eurasia with Africa and with the Americas with effectively a single stroke, one continuous set of railway systems, going down into Africa and transforming Africa, and you can't do it without railway systems. Look, for example, particularly Africa. Africa has a great amount, especially in the Southern Shield, of the mineral resources of Africa as a whole. Why aren't the Africans rich? Take a picture of this helicopter study, that is done from helicopters, traveling over various parts of Africa and looking down at these parts in daytime and night. What's the condition of Africa? Africa is a British crime against all humanity. Africa has one of the greatest agricultural areas of the world. Why don't they have farms? Why don't they have farm food? Why is there no light at night in most of Africa? Why is there no mass transportation system? Why is there no effective system of disease control? Why is there no development? Why is Africa only raped of its raw materials and not developed? Why is the water system of Africa not developed? Why is the Nile system never been completely developed? That's the problem. And therefore, we have to have ground rules for nation states. Our basic point is nation states. Because nation states involve the concept of culture. Now, the power of creativity, which does not exist in monkeys, but should exist in people, even not among some politicians. The power of creativity is unique to mankind. All processes on this planet and beyond are creative. The inanimate nature is creative. Look at what happened. You had a sun. The sun is sitting out there. It was all by itself, spinning around rapidly, not knowing where to go, in this neck of our galaxy. Just that little sun. And the sun spun off some things. It created, it just spun out there, and it began creating the periodic table. The complete periodic table, which keeps growing and developing all the time through isotopes, some of which are generated by the aid of life-living processes. And so suddenly, now you had the sun suddenly became a whole solar system. And all these kinds of developments occurred. So the sun itself is creative. The universe is creative, inherently. Animal life is creative, but none of them can think. None of them have the ability for voluntary transformation of the universe. Only human beings have the mentality for the voluntary creation of new states of organization in the universe. And we need more people who are creative. We need to get rid of this uncreative nonsense which was introduced in the post-war period. We have to develop populations. Therefore, we have to realize that when you're dealing with a language culture, which is a very complex thing, it's not just the language, but a lot of other things. When you're dealing with a language culture, you have a certain depth of a faculty called irony, which exists in every language culture, which is generally expressed in the music and the poetry, the art, and so forth of that culture. And therefore, people, when you touch that aspect, which is deeply embedded in a national culture, you are getting close to where the creative powers of the individual lie. So what our objective must be, the nation state, is based on the idea of nation state culture. You must bring into play the creative potential of a people through its culture. Therefore, you want them to represent themselves in terms of the fulfillment and enrichment of their own culture. Therefore, we want the consent of humanity. We don't want a consent of pig pens. We want the consent of different cultures, because creativity lies within the culture. Therefore, we want an assembly of peoples which are respectively sovereign peoples in order to mobilize their cultural potential for becoming truly human as they can become. And it's the consent of these sovereign cultures which we must bring into play in order to finally achieve what Franklin Roosevelt intended when he designed the idea of the United Nations, was to eliminate all elements of oppression from this planet and to create a system of sovereign nation states, of developed sovereign nation states, which will then take over the entire territory of the planet, leaving no room for empires or similar kinds of phenomena. And bringing that together, that should be our purpose. So therefore, we have some nations which have together the power, sufficient power, to free the slaves among the other nations. And our job is to free the slaves. So therefore, our objective here is to bring nations together, recognizing that no nation has sovereignty. Not now. We're going to have a system of sovereignty on this planet, of sovereign nations, because we need it, because human culture demands it. Therefore, we, nations which are strong enough to do this, who represent enough power to pull this off, have the obligation to exert that power we have when we're acting jointly to get rid of the British Empire. And when you think that way, you're thinking strategically. Get away from those lower forms of thought, which are petty ones. We're going to change this planet to make it a respectable planet that the other nations, the other planets don't have to be ashamed of. The essence of humanity is creativity as such. And the power in Russia, as I know of the power in Russia, is institutes like the Vinansky Institute, which has a headquarters in the Moscow, what used to be called Red Square. These people understand how to make a creative development of the planet. And our job is not money. It's not, it's not hakamakam, as they say in Israel. It's not money. It's not trade. Trade is nothing. Trade is as a divorce court. That's trade. That's a trading market these days. Now, we're talking about creativity. We're talking about transformation. Do you know what the Vinansky Institute represents in Moscow? Do you know what Vinansky represents in terms of Russian science and world science? Do you know what we can do if we unleash technology which is now being suppressed? Do you know what we can do to this planet? This will require a lot of nuclear power. It will require all the things that go with nuclear power. It will mean the development of thermonuclear fusion. It will mean the use of a space exploration driver as a program for driving human technology in the solar system. Well, if you want to create something, really, and unfortunately most people in the world don't know what creativity is anymore. They think it's, taking your pants off in public or something like that. Things almost like that are called creativity today. Or take rock music. Can somebody call that creative? The mind that does that is not creative. It may not be any mind at all. Now, we look always at objectives. In artistic creativity, classical artistic creativity, and scientific creative, we define objectives. The objectives are beyond the reach of what we can do today. But we're able to define the objective we wish to reach, often by negation. So therefore, the way you run a world economy today, in every part, you start with what? We're going to Mars. When? Well, it's going to take a little time to do that. How are we going to get there? Well, we got a little problem right now we're talking about, very much among my circles. We had, when the astronauts landed on the moon the second time, they discovered a deposit left by the sun called helium-3. And helium-3 is the most useful and most accessible and desirable fuel for thermonuclear fusion. Now, if I want to go to Mars, this is the way you have to think. Pose a question. You want to go to Mars. What does it take to do that? How was thermonuclear fusion developed in the first place? How were weapon systems developed in World War II? Completely new kinds of systems. How were they done? Because somebody asked the question, how can we do this? When somebody else said, oh, that's impossible. I can't find it in the textbooks. So we're going to go to Mars. And I pose this here as a very serious answer implicitly to this question and others which are coming up. We say, well, if you want to know how to think about humanity, talk about travel to and from Mars. Because by asking yourself to work out all the questions and solutions to those questions, which that question asks, you're giving mankind a sense of a future, a destiny of mankind. And you're forcing yourself to find in yourself the creative powers to determine how this could be done. And you work back and forth over generations. People are excited about it. They're excited about this thing today. Young people are excited about going to Mars. Again. And we know we're on the verge of losing the ability to do that, because humanity may be going back to the apes at the way we're going now. So therefore, we pick an objective beyond what we think could be done, and we say, wait a minute, some of the stuff can be done, can't it? And you think about travel to Mars. Well, to travel to Mars by ordinary methods people would think of, it would take 200 to 300 days. But if I wanted to send a vessel to Mars, an automated vessel, we could probably try it, it's a shot, with about 3 to 6 days. We would use helium-3 as a fuel, build a device for a fusion impulse device with a potential thrust equivalent to 1 gravity as acceleration factor, and you could probably make the trip in 3 to 6 days. Now, whether a human being could survive that treatment or not is another question. Possibly, so forth. But that's just another thing to ask about. We know we can send things to Mars, and including some politicians, perhaps, and see how they come back, what condition they come back in. And maybe it's a very interesting test to run. But by challenging ourselves to look at these kinds of questions, of challenges which are on the fringes of the imagination, and sorting out those which we realize we have some capability for solving, that is the process of creativity. That's the case in classical art, it's the case in classical poetry, it's in everything of any importance. Always look ahead beyond what you are today, what you're capable of doing today, what your nation is capable of doing today, and take that as your objective. Now, that is not a thing in itself. What you're doing is you're forcing yourself to bring forth in yourself what is specifically human, willful creativity, real creativity, to making an original discovery. How? It's stimulated by kicking yourself in the butt and saying, this ought to be possible to do. What do we know about it? Could we actually do it? What questions do we have to answer to solve that problem? Everything that mankind has done, whether in art, in poetry, in physical science, and so forth, in achievement generally is done that way. And therefore, that's the way we have to approach this. We have to say our objective is to go for progress. Once you define that, and once you take a factor in Russia, which is one which I especially like, the Vernadsky Institute in Moscow, headquarters in Moscow. And I think about what that institution represents. And what Vernadsky represents is the unfinished work of Vernadsky and some other people associated with him. I say, now if I talk about Russia or Siberia or so forth, yeah, so what? But then I say, what are some of the questions which are posed by Vernadsky and his associates? Suppose we start to look at some of the things that are made possible once we take Vernadsky's questions into account. Now I have oriented society toward that. What we want to do is take young people, not to give them a job, not to train them to do something. We want to put them through a training program, yes, as a context, but we want to give them a destiny. We want to give them a mission which takes them beyond themselves. We don't want to give a guy a job in a shop producing something. We want to make him a machine tool designer. We want to make him a scientist, that sort of thing. And the secret here is to do that, is to take the view of society. We're not going to do the same old all the time. We're going to take our young people and we're going to inspire them with what they can become, not just what the Army promises them, U.S. Army, what you can make, what you can become. This is the standard. We don't want routine education. I take people, I say, cut out the mathematics. You're stuck in routine. You're not thinking. You're not thinking creatively. You're not posing questions of principle and testing those questions of principle in your own mind. And when you do that, they start to think. They tell the young people. If you go through a routine, go through the mathematics and learn this and learn that, that's nothing. That doesn't get you anywhere. And that's what we have to do here. We have to realize that what we're doing, we're taking people who are being stultified, who are effectively drugged by routine, who have no future. They have a skill, probably no better than their grandfathers or less so than their grandfathers. And you're giving them a job, and they're trading. What the hell is that? It's nothing. It's giving them the challenge of bringing the creative powers out, which result in an increase in the creative abilities of the human being. New technologies, new frontiers. This is the answer. And we do that by going into the culture of the people. And we try to promote the creativity which lies within the culture of a people. Provoke that culture. Challenge it. Bring people into cooperation around this kind of cultural opportunity. And you increase the productive powers of labor. People believe in the fairy tales. And the fairy tales is that value lies in a currency. The currency has no intrinsic value. No currency has an intrinsic value. See, what's the value here? The question is typical, though. It's typical from Russia, it's typical from some people in China, typical all over the world. They don't understand money. They think they do, and that's the biggest mistake. I would like to take money out in the backyard and shoot it, and then give it a new name, not money, and then people might understand it. Look, the essence of human existence and of economy is increase in the productive powers of labor. There is no intrinsic value in any substance or any currency, especially currency. It has no intrinsic value. A currency is simply a convention. It has no intrinsic value. The intrinsic value is physical, but it's physical in a general way, not simply in something tangible. What we invest in the power of labor, the power of the human labor, when equipped with certain means to produce more value for human beings than that labor and those resources represented beforehand. So if I take $1 trillion, or what the United States owes to China, and instead of letting it sit there as a debt waiting to be collected by China, which never will happen, we say we're going to take that debt and we're going to tell the United States we're going to invest that debt it has to us in this investment. Then everybody benefits, because we bring together the means of creating new wealth. As we should know, money has been destroying the wealth of the world, the real wealth of the world. Money can be slavery. No, the key thing here is this wealth is the degree that is invested in its equivalent, what is represented by is invested in a way which results in an increase of the amount of real wealth, not money wealth, real wealth. And therefore, if you have a sane system of economy, the money value of wealth should conform and follow the actual physical wealth increase. In other words, if there's an increase in profit without an actual increase in physical wealth, it's a fraud. Typical of what goes on in the United States these days. You get less than what you pay for. It's by investing in things which result in a greater gain for humanity in terms of efficient physical values that you're investing in. And if you're investing in improving your nation in physical terms, you're profitable. If you're investing in money, you're a parasite. And the problem we're going to have to deal with in this is to recognize that these problems exist. They lurk all around in the institutions of government. And we're going to have to clean the mess up. But we're going to have to do this by a radical move of this four-power agreement. The assembly of four of the most powerful nations on this planet, nations which are of a diverse cultural character with respect to one another, but which therefore are more suitably representative of humanity than a group of nations which simply agreed with each other in their cultural characteristics. We're now representing humanity rather than a block of a group. And we're taking the most powerful group and assembling around them to have a powerful enough group to smash the British Empire, to destroy the British Empire once and for all, in order to free mankind of Satan. You want to get rid of Satan? Close down the British Empire. No, this is what. So therefore, this is the kind of situation we're in, and therefore we do have to establish a law for mankind again, which is not essentially different than what our intention of our Constitution was. We're going to have to do it in terms which are understood, as Roosevelt would have agreed, among nations which have different cultural characteristics. We're going to bring nations with different cultural characteristics together for a common understanding of the aims of mankind. And that's what the thing is. And we're going to have to realize that we're cleaning up a mess. We're cleaning up the outhouse in the process of doing this kind of negotiation in reforming the United States. And presumably we'll have an angry group of congressmen who will do something, will no longer go along to get along, but will do the job which their conscience should require of them. That's where we are. And these problems will occur. Don't worry about them as long as we're doing something to fix them.